Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the April 5th, 2016 meeting of the Downers Grove Village Council. It is my privilege to call this meeting to order. There are copies of our meeting agenda on either side of the room on the shelves that you see on either side. If you haven't already done so and would like to pick up a copy and follow along with our proceedings tonight, I would encourage you to do so. There will be multiple opportunities for public comment, both with respect to items that are on our agenda tonight, as well as a segment that tonight is under item 5, which pertains to comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not on tonight's agenda. Also, as a heads up, we will be having our conversation under item 11, the first reading or workshop agenda item regarding the stormwater utility discussion. That will be taking place across the hall in the committee rooms. When we reach that point in our agenda, we will adjourn from here and reconvene in the committee room for a focused discussion, continued focused discussion with respect to the Downers Grove stormwater utility. It is our proud custom to begin our meetings by reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this juncture, I'd like to ask everyone to please rise and join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Before I ask for a roll call, I'd like to indulge everyone for a moment. As many in the room and beyond know, one of our young citizens, Noah Van Houten, passed away from a terrible disease, Batten's disease, just a few weeks shy of his 12th birthday. Noah, in his battle as a Batten's warrior, touched in his very short life the lives of many people in our community in ways that words can't even begin to describe. He and his family have epitomized bravery in the face of tragedy, and it has been extremely powerfully moving to see the community come together in the way it has to mourn Noah's loss, his family's loss, but also celebrate his life and his bravery in the face of what is a terrible disease. What I'd like to ask at this time is for a brief moment of silence in remembrance of Noah Van Houten. Thank you. I know that all my colleagues join with me in saying, and all village staff, that our thoughts and prayers are with the Van Houten family this week and with Noah always. I'm also very proud and grateful to our firefighters who have designated as their charity, as part of their annual firefighters charity golf outing, which is taking place in August. Their chosen charity for that event will be Noah's Hope, which is the charity that was created a while back, and you may have seen 5K races and other events to raise money to try to put towards research to find a cure to this terrible, interminable disease. And so I want to thank all our firefighters for doing that, and everyone else in the community that has either supported, attended, or shared their thoughts and prayers with the Van Houtens. They really have touched our community in ways that are difficult to express. Thank you. With that, I would like to ask our fine village clerk, April Holden, to please call the roll.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Here.
Commissioner White?
Here.
Commissioner Vitimo? Here. Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Olson?
Here.
Commissioner Barnett? Mayor Tully?
Here. Thank you. That brings us to item 3, which pertains to minutes of prior council meeting minutes. Are there any, we have one set of minutes to review and approve tonight, and those are our minutes from our regular council meeting on March 22nd, 2016. Are there any amendments, changes, corrections, or comments with respect to those minutes? If not, I'll ask for a motion to approve.
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the minutes of March 22nd, 2016 as presented.
I second the motion to approve the minutes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Those minutes are approved. Brings us to item 4, which is labeled presentations, and I'm very glad to have a number of very special presentations in the form of proclamations to read and, in most cases, to present tonight to well-deserving recipients. First, proclamation pertains to National Service Recognition Day. Whereas service to others is a hallmark of the American Charter and central to how we meet our challenges. And whereas the nation's mayors are increasingly turning to national service and volunteerism as a cost-effective strategy to meet city needs. Whereas AmeriCorps, Senior Corps participants address the most pressing challenges facing our cities and counties. And whereas national service expands economic opportunity by creating more sustainable, resilient communities and providing education, career skills, and leadership abilities for those who serve. And whereas the Corporation for National and Community Services shares a priority with mayors nationwide to engage citizens, improve lives, and strengthen communities, and is joining with the National League of Cities, City of Service, and mayors across the country to recognize the impact of service on the Mayor's Day of Recognition for National Service on today, April 5th, 2016. Now therefore, I, Martin T. Tully, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim April 5th, 2016 as National Service Recognition Day in the Village of Downers Grove, and encourage residents to recognize the positive impact of national service in our village and thank those who serve and find ways to give back to their community. That's number one. Number two pertains to the village's Green Business Recognition Program. As many of you probably know, the village launched the Green Business Recognition Program in February of 2013. The purpose of the program is to officially recognize local organizations who have made substantial efforts to become environmentally sustainable by adopting best practices in a number of areas, including water reduction and recycling, water conservation, energy conservation, transportation, public education and awareness, as well as innovation. Tonight, I'm very proud to present to the Downers Grove Park District, and we have a representative here tonight from the Park District who I'll ask to come up. That's why I'm giving you a heads up, so you can come up while I'm reading it. Proclamation recognizing the Downers Grove Park District for being a Green Business Program recipient. Whereas the Downers Grove Park District, located at 2455 Warrenville Road in Downers Grove, operates the Downers Grove Museum, Lincoln Center, Downers Grove Golf Club, Lyman Woods, and the Recreation Center, as well as many public parks in Downers Grove. And whereas the Downers Grove Park District has been operating in the Village of Downers Grove since 1946, and whereas the Downers Grove Park District has made a commitment to sustainability through substantial efforts to be environmentally friendly in the areas of water conservation, water reduction and recycling, energy conservation, transportation innovation, and many educational programs. And whereas the Environmental Concerns Commission of the Village of Downers Grove has acknowledged the green business practices of the Downers Grove Park District on May 10th, 2016, now, therefore, I, Martin T. Tully, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim the Downers Grove Park District to be a Village of Downers Grove green business. And here to receive the proclamation is Rich Zizek, General Manager for the Recreation Center at the Downers Grove Park District. Rich, I'll come down and join you. I'll take you over to center stage here. One of these days you have to put an accent. Congratulations. That's yours. Congratulations.
On behalf of the Downers Grove Park District, I'd like to thank the village for this recognition. Obviously, this is a no-brainer for us as a park district. We oversee multiple parks and outdoor programs, so we do our part in being environmentally conscious with everything that we do. So with this recognition, hopefully this will strengthen that goal that we have within the park district, not only to our staff, but to all of the residents that we try to reach out to be environmentally conscious. So thank you very much again for this recognition.
Terrific, thank you. Thank you for helping make the program so very successful. Leading by example is the best way to demonstrate the importance of a cause. The third and final proclamation I have pertains to a very important recognition, and it pertains to recognizing Telecommunicators Week. Here at Downers Grove, as many of you probably know, we have a fire department, we have a police department, we have a public works department. But particularly the first two wouldn't operate anywhere near at the level of efficiency and excellence that they do without the support and help of some very, very important people who you don't see racing down the street with flashing red lights and sirens, but they're working very hard behind the scenes to make sure that those flashing red lights and sirens get where they need to be when they need to be. And that's our VOC Center, our Village Operations Center here in Downers Grove. And the hardworking members of the village that work in the VOC are the ones that receive those calls from people in the most dire times of their life when they call 911. And they're the ones that make sure that all those flashing red lights and sirens get where they need to be to help protect our residents and save lives. So I'm very honored and to be able to read this proclamation and then invite up some very important folks from our VOC, Jenny Rizzo and Heather Libby. And I don't know if Kurt Bluter or Chief or Deputy Chief Gillette, if you want to add anything after I read this and before they come up, I'll leave it up to you, no obligation. Without further ado, whereas emergencies can occur at any time that require police, fire, or emergency medical services, and whereas telecommunications are the first and most critical contact our citizens have with emergency services. Whereas dedicated Downers Grove Village Operations Center telecommunicators daily serve the citizens of the village by answering their telephone calls for police, fire, and emergency services, and by coordinating the dispatch of emergency response equipment. And whereas telecommunicators are the single vital link for our police officers and firefighters by monitoring their activities by radio, providing them with information, and ensuring their safety. And whereas millions of people depend upon the skill, expertise, and commitment of public safety professionals who aid in providing 911 emergency assistance to citizens across our nation. And whereas each telecommunicator exhibits compassion, understanding, and professionalism during the performance of their jobs. Now therefore, I, Martin T. Tully, Mayor of the Village of Downers Grove, do hereby proclaim the week of April 10th through 16th, 2016 as Telecommunicators Week in the Village of Downers Grove in honor and recognition of our telecommunicators and the vital contributions that they make to the safety and well-being of our citizens. Jenny and Heather, do you want to come up? And I'll be happy to present this to you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Podium is yours. Chief Bluter?
Just want to take a moment to thank the mayor and the council for recognizing telecommunicators, and I too would like to thank them for the job they do, and I think you put it so eloquently. They are the voice behind the radio, they're the voice of confidence for both fire and the police department, and they're the ones that staff the telephone 24/7, 365 when the citizens call. So again, they're the ones behind the scenes, and I would like to thank them for all their hard work and everything they've been doing. I also would like to thank our partners from Westmont, Chief Mulhern and Battalion Chief Light that came out to honor them as well, because everybody knows we dispatch for Westmont too. So thank you for coming, and thank you, council.
Thank you, Chief. And welcome to our good friends from Westmont. Appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. We appreciate the partnership very much. Thank you. That ends the presentations, and that brings us to item 5, which is previously indicated is reserved for public comments of a general nature with respect to items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if any members of the audience have any questions or comments of a general nature with respect to something that's not on tonight's agenda, the protocol is please come down to the podium, introduce yourself, and we welcome hearing from you. Seeing as there's no mad rush to the podium, we will move on to the consent agenda, which is item 6. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Mayor Tully, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second the motion to approve the consent agenda.
Are there any questions or comments from any members of the audience with respect to any of the items on tonight's consent agenda? Questions or comments from any members of the village council with respect to any of those items? Seeing that there are none, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Vatimo? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye, consent agenda passes unanimously. That brings us to item 7, which is our active agenda, and we have 3 items under tonight's active agenda. First item is, do I have a motion with respect to an ordinance authorizing a special use for 4617 Roslyn Road to permit an extended family accessory housing unit?
Mayor Tully, I move to table the ordinance authorizing a special use for 4617 Roslyn Road to permit an extended family accessory housing unit.
Second.
Questions or comments? Commissioner Wallach?
Thank you, Mayor. I've worked diligently this afternoon and have come across some baffling information that I would like to share with the council and our staff and the petitioner.
Well, actually, the motion that's on the table is a motion to table. Are there any questions or comments with respect to the motion to table? The substantive matter is not, there's not a motion pertaining to that.
Okay.
If there's no questions or comments to that, then roll call on the motion to table, please.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Nay.
Commissioner Fatimo? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The motion to table passes. That matter will be tabled to a future date. That brings us to item 7B as in Boyd of a motion with respect to an ordinance authorizing the vacation of a public alley adjacent to 4147 Bernard Road.
Mayor Tully, I move to adopt an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a public alley right-of-way in the village of Downers Grove, a portion of a public alley adjacent to 4147 and 4205 Bernard Road as presented.
Second.
Are there any questions or comments on this item from members of the audience? Good evening, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Tully, Commissioners, staff. I'm Gordon Goodman. I live at 5834 Midoff. And in general, I feel that the public ownership of our rights-of-way is a very significant component of our public resources, and encourage that the rights-of-way that are undeveloped for automobile transportation be used for alternative transportation, such as walking and bicycling. And we have many of those opportunities throughout the community. This particular right-of-way is not such an opportunity, and therefore I fully support the vacation to the use by the Park District to connect two parcels of Park District-owned land with suitable easement restrictions on that vacation land so that it can continue to play its role as corridor for public utilities. While I'm here, I'll also support the second action the council is going to consider, which is waiving the fee which would normally be charged for this valuable resource in favor of granting it to the Park District without requiring the Park District to pay the village for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the audience with respect to item 7B, the public alley vacation? Questions or comments from members of the village council?
Nope.
Hearing none, roll call, please.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Aye.
Commissioner Fatimo? Aye. Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The matter passes unanimously. That brings us to item 7C as in Charlie. Do I have a motion authorizing a fee waiver request for the vacation of a public alley located adjacent to 4147 Bernard Road?
Mayor Tully, I move that we authorize a fee waiver in the amount of $4,901.18 to the Downers Grove Park District for vacating a certain portion of the public alley right-of-way adjacent to 4147 and 4205 Bernard Road.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any questions or comments from members of the audience with respect to this item? Questions or comments from members of the village council? Commissioner Waldeck?
I commented in the last meeting why I did not support the fee waiver for this vacation. It has not been a reciprocal arrangement. In the information that I asked last time for the last meeting, there was a lot of information, for example, how we acquired the property for the water tower at McCollum Park. But in exchange for that water tower, we actually paid a lot more than the $4,000 some odd dollars there. It hasn't been reciprocal, and I do not see a necessity in having a fee waiver this time. And if anybody wants to go into further detail as to my explanation, they can check the minutes from the last meeting. But I will not be supporting a fee waiver. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Olson?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I stated it last week that I believe that all property owners should, if there's a vacation of the public alley, the property owner, that the person that the land is transferring ownership to should pay according to policy, whether it's a government, a corporation, or an individual. And so therefore, I won't be supporting this tonight. I, of course, respect and value the relationship that we have with the Park District and the relationship that we have, but on the principle of the matter, I'm not going to support this. It's a small dollar amount, I realize, but I think the important piece is the principle of the matter. I think we should ensure that we, if we're going to apply a policy to the residents, we should also apply that equally to businesses and other governments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Jose?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a piece of property that the village owns that it obtained from the developer when the subdivision was created for no fee. We don't have any plans to build anything on it or really do anything else with it. As was noted in public comment, it's not really necessary or usable for other alternative transportation purposes. It's a taxpayer asset currently, and it's going to remain a taxpayer asset. I don't see a need to charge one government body that gets its funding from our taxpayers to send it over here to another government body funded by the same taxpayer. And as far as the past, I'll let the past be the past, and I'm not going to let it stop us from doing what I think is the right thing. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner White?
I'll also be supporting and voting in favor of the fee waiver in this instance. That said, what I hear tonight is concerning to me that we have insufficient coordination and communication between the various units of local government. If there's a sense that the relationships aren't, quote, fair, end quote, that's the issue we got to get to the bottom of it, and we need to spend more time talking to each other and finding a way for us all to have an opportunity to meet jointly to talk through some of these issues. It would be a very good thing. I'm very concerned about the symbolic consequence of denying a $4,900 fee waiver without a plan in place to establish reasonable protocols for these things going forward. So I would want the council to feel comfortable that waiving the fee was not harmful to the taxpayers of the village in a way that allows us to maximize cooperation with all of the overlapping units of government. Perhaps there's an issue that we have to get to the bottom of, but I think opposing this fee waiver is the wrong venue, the wrong forum to get to the bottom of those issues. Therefore, I'll be voting yes this evening.
Commissioner Wallach? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you again. As far as property and anything exchanging from one taxing body to another and saying it's a wash, we all have a responsibility to our constituents, whether it's the village constituents, the Park District constituents, the schools constituents. And so we are responsible to those taxpayers for what we charge and what we don't charge. And so just saying, well, they're a different taxing body, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to raise taxes or you know, we're going to raise our taxing responsibilities are going to be a wash just because we're giving this away. They have a responsibility, we have a responsibility. We have an asset, and I feel that we should be compensated for that asset, just as they would expect to be compensated for their assets, as I would expect the schools to be compensated for any assets they might turn over to us. It's not a wash, and it shouldn't be a accounting wash. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. I said last time that I will support this and intend to do so. Just to add a little more historical background to it, at the risk of repeating what I said 2 weeks ago, the history of the vacation of alleys is one that originally, when I first encountered it back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, requests for alley vacations, village property that were not going to be used for alleys or roads or other access ways, either vehicular, pedestrian, or otherwise. Requests were made, and routinely those were granted without any compensation. to whomever asked. Developers, private citizens, governmental bodies, basically the village gave them away. That policy changed because it didn't seem right that a public asset was put into private hands without some compensation to the public body. So I want to emphasize that the change in the policy was to no longer take a public asset and put it into private hands without some compensation to the public who were giving up that asset. So we came up with a policy, and that policy has been revised and tweaked over time, mostly in terms of how you calculate the value of the land, because in most instances, the land we're talking about here is an easement or a very thin strip, and no one can build on it, and it really doesn't have a whole lot of value to anyone other than the recipient. And the philosophy has long been that taking a public asset, putting it into private hands would benefit that private individual, and that shouldn't happen without some compensation, some fair compensation to the public for having given up that asset and putting it into private hands. So I tell that story because we have acted consistently with that throughout the term of the policy, and that's not to say the policy can't further be revised, but that's a different discussion. I'm a big believer in people should have a right to have expectations of how they will be treated, and if a policy and a practice has been one way, then we should change it before someone comes up and has it changed in the middle of their matter. That's a fair question, but this is not a situation where a public asset is being put in private hands, and that's a big distinction in my mind. This is a public asset that's being put, it's staying in public hands. So the basis for the change of the policy, it goes back almost 15, 20 years. I don't see that applying here. So I have no problem with this fee waiver because a public asset is staying in public hands. Here, it just happens to be a public entity, another public taxing body that's service area is nearly coterminous with that of the Village of Downers Grove. And so literally and figuratively, it's really going from the left hand to the right hand. It's not somehow enriching a private entity, whether it's a developer or a private citizen who now can build a bigger house, their lot's worth more money. That's not what we're talking about here. And that was really what drove the change of the policy, which is why I don't have any problem with this, because I think it's entirely consistent with the genesis and the impetus behind the policy. And I also think it's consistent with past practice. One last comment is I just think that all of us should be careful about making decisions based on past practices of another board or entity who is no longer constituted today as it may have been in the past. For example, I would hope that this council would not want to be treated based on how this council was constituted 5 or 10 years ago, because that's not who this body is. This body is now 7 members who are here. And I think that's what any other board expects and deserves to be treated, is according to how it's currently constituted, not some decision that was made by people who are long gone. Because it's not an individual we're talking about here. We're talking about a body whose members change over time. I wouldn't want that practice to be returned anyway, because I don't think it's fair. So as mentioned last time, I think for all the reasons I mentioned, I'm fully in support of this fee waiver, and would be in the future unless we change our policy, which, again, if the council wishes to revisit the policy and change it, it is within the council's purview to do that. If there are no other questions, then I will ask for a roll call, please.
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Waldeck?
Nay.
Commissioner Fatimo? Aye. Commissioner Olson?
Nay.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. The matter passes 4-2. And that brings us to the end of our active agenda, and we don't have a first reading. Well, yes, we do have a first reading, sorry. As I mentioned earlier, our first reading is towards the end of the meeting, and it will consist of the stormwater utility discussion that will take place across the hall in the committee room. So we'll move on to the mayor's report, and I just have one thing I want to report out. At the end of last month, one of the leaders of a very important institution in our community, the Downers Grove Public Library, retired after having served for a number of years. More specifically, Rick Aston, who has served as the director of the Downers Grove Public Library since September 2011, retired from admirable service of both the community and the library. He had a number of accomplishments. If you've been to the library periodically over the last number of years, you've seen there's been a lot of dramatic changes with respect to keeping it current with technology, as well as making it as usable and as relevant to its customers. The most visible item on his to-do list of things as the director was the major building renovation that was completed in October 2014 that saw a lot of those changes come into place. The library is obviously something that's very well loved in our community, and I want to thank, on behalf of the village council and the entire village, Rick for his admirable service as director of the library. We appreciate everything that he did and wish him the best in the next chapter in his life. And we'll look forward to who his successor will be, which will be determined by the Library Board of Trustees at some future date. And so best wishes to Rick Aston. And that ends my report and brings us to item 9, which is the village manager report. Mr. Fieldman.
No report tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Somehow keep writing you out of these. I'm going to ask for the attorney's report. Ms. Petrarca.
I have no report. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm just going to keep writing you in. You're a writing candidate. That brings us to item 10, council member reports. This is an opportunity for members of the village council to report out either on items of interest or goings-on in the community for those who are here in attendance, or a number of council members serve as liaisons to other boards, and when there's something of relevance to share, we ask them to do so. So I'll ask if there's any council member reports tonight, starting with Commissioner White.
No report.
Thank you. Commissioner Olson.
No report.
Thank you. Commissioner Vitimo.
No report.
Commissioner Waldeck.
No report.
And Commissioner Jose.
Thank you, Mayor. Wanted to remind everybody that this Saturday, April the 9th, is Passport to Safety Day and Wheelie Big Trucks at the Lincoln Center from 10 to noon. The Passport to Safety is sponsored by the village, of course, the Downers Grove Park District, and Advocate Good Samaritan Hospital. Kids of all ages come out and learn a bit about staying safe in the community, and also enjoy getting into the various fire apparatuses, police vehicles, dump trucks, everything else you might find out at Public Works. So I hope you'll come check that out Saturday, April 9th, 10 to noon at Lincoln Center. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. And before asking for a motion to recess into the committee room, I'll just note that item 12 is not being forgotten. We're going to take that up next door as well. So with that, I'll ask for a motion to recess into the committee room to discuss the balance of tonight's agenda.
Mayor Tully, I move to recess to the committee room.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Okay.
Very good. We'll see you. There's an A.
Make sure everyone's reflect that.
The motion to recess passes by a slim margin. We'll see you across the hall in a few minutes. We are recessed in the committee room to continue our discussion of the remaining 2 agenda items, item 11 and 12. Item 11 pertains to continued conversation regarding the stormwater utility. So we'll start things off as we customarily do by asking staff to introduce the item. Mr. Fieldman, how are you this evening? Please introduce the item and we'll discuss forthwith.
Happy to do so, Mayor. Thank you. The item, consider changes to the stormwater utility, is a top priority action item of this village council. The council started the discussion on this issue back on March 8th, and there was a pretty thorough staff report providing a great background on this issue that was published in late January. That report, as well as a secondary follow-up report, is available on our website, and if you're in the room here, there's hard copies of the second portion of that report here on the edge of the council table. Based on that first discussion on March 8th, 5 options are being presented tonight for potential changes. Actually, option 1 is the current structure and plan of the stormwater utility, which is a fee-based system with fees paid by property owners based on the amount of impervious area on their property. Option 2A would be to continue with the current work plan identified in the report. We would use fees for most of the revenue generation, but property taxes would be used to make payments on bond issuances or debt service, both existing and proposed in the work plan. Option 2B, current work plan, but this time property taxes would be used to pay not only debt service on bonds, but also all other aspects of capital improvements, the expansion of the stormwater system itself, not for maintenance though. Fees would continue to be used for operations and maintenance. Option 3A would be to accelerate the amount of operations and maintenance we perform on the stormwater system, getting us closer to the recommended level sooner, and taxes would pay for the debt service for the payments on bonds. And finally, option 3B, again, accelerated operations and maintenance plan with taxes covering all the expenses related to all capital projects and capital improvements. Each of those options are summarized in the report, and they each have their table explaining the impacts financially, both to the village in terms of bottom line annual revenue, and the impact to a typical house, owner of a typical house in Downers Grove. For reference, I've included the summary table that shows year one, or 2017, of each of the options, starting with how much total revenue would be generated for the village in 2017, and how that would break out in terms of fee versus tax revenue. This line, ERU, is an equivalent runoff unit. It's the basis by which fees are paid for the stormwater utility, and you can see how those fees would change based on the different options. And then finally, at the bottom of this table, would be the impact of each option if you owned a typical house, a taxable value of about $100,000, which is about a market value of around $300,000. There's much more information in the report. I know all council members, and I think most of the people in the room, are very familiar with these concepts in the report. So with that, Mayor, we're happy to answer any questions, but we're excited to hear a dialogue among council members.
Thank you. And this is a workshop or first reading, so typically the way we conduct these, they're in a more informal environment, and initially the council will have a discussion, because our goal as part of this is to get the information and have a conversation amongst ourselves. And then after we get to a point where it makes sense, I will break and ask for input and comments from the audience, and then we may have more discussion, and then we'll go back and forth. But this is more informal than, which is part of the reason why we're here as opposed to into council chambers to have a discussion. One thing I want to do is just share something with my colleagues, and I appreciate Commissioner White sharing in advance. I wasn't as diligent as you were to do that. But one of the things that I tend to think very visually. Thank you. And there's a number of different things going on here, because you can look at this and you see a lot of dollars and scary stuff. But really what we're talking about here is the same that we've been talking about for a number of years, and that is we have, I'll just draw this square that represents stormwater needs. And those needs are whatever projects we're going to do in the village that relate to stormwater. Those projects are divided up roughly into two categories. And where you divide them up remains to be seen, but one is capital, another one is, as has been said here, is O&M, or operations and maintenance. So this is to build whatever it is that manages stormwater, then the O&M, roughly speaking, is the cost it takes to maintain it and maintain it and operate it. Things wear out, you have to maintain them, just like your car or anything else. So there's some key questions here. One, how big should this box be? That's a question that this council has to answer. It can be this size, it can be smaller, it can be bigger. That's a question of how many projects do we want to do. That's a policy decision the community's got to make. That's a policy decision this council has to make. Is it this size? Is it this size? Is it that size? Or is it some other size? The other thing that we have to decide is within that box, depending on what side it is, this is kind of a slider scale. How much of this line should be spent on capital and how much should be spent on operation and maintenance? So you could move this over here, you could move it over there, so that's a variable. The size of the box is a variable. And what all that does is really give you a list of projects. And you can focus on operations and maintenance, you can focus on capital. There's a school of thought that says, if you don't have enough money to operate and maintain the things you already have, you shouldn't be building new things. It's a fair point, but there's a lot of people out there who want new projects to help manage some stormwater issues we have in town, and the only way to do that is to do new projects. When you do a new project, then there's an expense that comes along with maintaining that project and operating it. So where that line goes within the box is one variable, the size of the box is another variable. Okay, well, all that does is tell you what projects we have, but those are two things that we have to decide. But then the third thing is the one that everybody loves, which gets into all these numbers up here, is, okay, how do we pay for it? In some degree, the size of the box defines how much you have to pay, because the bigger the box, let's face it, the more money it's going to cost. The smaller the box, less money. And then how you apply that money between capital and operations and maintenance, that's again something that the council can decide. We've been talking about this for 20 years. We came up with a plan a number of years ago, and then revised it after the April 23 storm event, that defined a box. And just, again, I'm being very simplistic here, so I will concede to the criticism later. I'm being very simplistic. We came up with a box that was revised after the April 2013 stormwater event. It was basically what I'm drawing here in green. That's when Mr. Fielding talks about the plan, that's the plan. And there is a line, which I won't try to estimate, of how much is capital, how much is operation and maintenance within that box. There have been proposals to shrink the box, there have been proposals to keep the box, there have been proposals to increase the box. But this green box that was decided upon and then modified after the April 2013 extraordinary rain event comes with a price tag. And we know what that is. And that, I forget what that number is, but
Starts out about 6 to 8 million right now and goes up to 10 to 12 million in 15 years. As far as annual revenue requirements, give or take.
okay, that's the current box. And this is all over time because none of these projects could be done in 1 year anyway. This is something that has to be done over, in some cases, decades. But we know how much this green box costs. Then the question is, how do we fund it, over what period of time, and from what sources? And that gets into the conversation about the stormwater utility. Because previously, stormwater projects were done through the property tax levy. Which is important because we've always been paying for stormwater projects. We just used to pay for them through our property taxes. Some portion of your property taxes was put into the village budget and was applied towards stormwater projects. A few years ago, we shifted to a stormwater utility fee. And that then raises the next variable. How do we fund this amount, whatever this amount is determined to be? Do we fund it with 100% property tax? Do we fund it with 100% fees for the stormwater utility? Do we do some hybrid combinations? So that's variable number 4. Do you do this? Do you do something in the middle? Do you do that? Or, goodness, one thing we could do is come up with other. I haven't heard what that is, but there's some other way to pay for this. And we could do it, who said vehicle stickers once upon a time? But seriously, I mean, all kidding aside,
That comes after.
there could come up with another funding method if you wanted. But that's another variable that this council has to decide. And then within that, there's a fifth variable. I'm going to run out of colors here. No, I'm not. There's orange. There's a fifth variable, and that is, well, to contrast it, if you're going to pay for this by property tax, there really isn't a variable. Because you're going to come up with a dollar amount, you're going to levy it, and whatever that amount is, it gets collected. There's no variation. Doesn't matter how expensive your house is, doesn't matter how big your roof is, doesn't matter how big your land is, doesn't matter if you paved over every blade of grass in your yard, or if you have a giant detention basin in your yard, doesn't matter. You're paying for it based on whatever's levied. That's not the case with a stormwater utility. This can be adjusted, and there are different types of stormwater utilities, and how they calculate how you assess properties for a stormwater fee varies. So the other important variable here is, if you're going to have a stormwater utility, either in whole or in part, what's it look like? Now, there was one that was adopted a few years ago, and that was based on working with consultants and looking at what was done with other stormwater utilities around the country and in Illinois, and we came up with one that is the way it's currently constituted. It could certainly be adjusted. So if we end up retaining either in whole and part a stormwater utility, we could modify how it's calculated. I mean, there are some places where they just charge a flat fee to everybody. There are other places where they have multiple tiers. It can be complicated. It can be simple. This is just another variable that we may have to consider. So I just wanted to point that out because I think more visually, and so I just view this as describing what the variables are. There may be more that we have to consider. Those numbers are important because they put real dollars on what some of these variables mean. But as a community, and as a council, this is the stuff that we have to figure out, and they all interrelate. So I just wanted to share that because that's kind of how it's in my head. Again, I apologize, I wasn't as diligent as to put it into a memo in advance, so I thought I would do the next best thing, which is draw a picture.
Well, can I jump in here then? Sure. Okay. First, I'd like to commend Mayor Tully. That's actually a very impressive and accurate description of the issue. And I think those boxes and that framework helps immensely. A few comments to expand upon, not to contradict anything that was said, but to expand upon it.
Please.
I think we need to remember that this council cannot commit to a box other than the FY17 box. That we can tell future councils, it'd be really nice if you did this long list of projects.
That's right.
And we can say that we really think you should do these. But the consensus to have those projects continue over a 12, 15, or 20-year period has to come from the community, where the community elects council members who believe, for example, that the stormwater utility fee should be raised 8% per year, so there's enough money to make the box as big as our consultants think it should be. So therefore, we can't impose that consensus on the community. That consensus has to come from the community, so that, and on that point, the fact that ever since utility was passed, I don't think there's ever been a council that's raised the utility, the full recommended amount.
That's a good point, because this number, we've never had, the fee from the utility has never been enough to actually meet these numbers, because no council yet has actually raised it to where it's supposed to be according to a plan. A plan was put into place that would raise this money over time with incremental amounts in the utility, and that's never been voted. And to your point, you can't commit the next council. So if one council says, we're going to do the increase necessary to stand this plan, and the next council says, I don't want to do that, or the community says, I don't want to do that, then we don't do
I mean,
it.
to be clear, there were increases. They just weren't.
The full
Right, they weren't
according to plan.
the amount. So there were increases that were approved.
But what I'm suggesting, though, is that the decision not to increase the full 8% as originally planned, I believe offers at least some empirical evidence that council members weren't comfortable that the full 8% plan had broad-based support in the community. Because if they thought there was broad-based support in the community, they'd do what, we would vote the way that the community would want us to. So that's why I believe this was a very important top priority action item. And I think what's far more important than what we decide is that we find out, or that we try to build consensus within the community. So those elected in 17, those elected in 19, 21, 23, 25, have an understanding what the community wants. I guess my final topic for right now is, well, my son's doing high school math right now, and I'm trying to help him a little bit, and they're factoring polynomials. And to do that, you eliminate variables. You eliminate variables to the best of your ability. And on that point, with respect to FY17 only, I believe we should reduce the variable regarding the size of the box, that we commit to the size of the box that meets the current plan. I believe it's 3.9 million. That we commit right now, and then we take one variable off the table. So if we commit to that, there's one fewer variables in that long polynomial equation that we got to solve, and then we can work on solving the others. My own opinion regarding how we pay for it has been, my last memo was very long and detailed, somewhere between 2A and 2B, except 3 and 3B in future years was something I would consider, but not in this year, for the reason I said, to eliminate the size of the box as a variable for FY17, just because we're then simplifying the equation, making it easier to reach a conclusion within the amount of time that we have to reach a conclusion in. But I have very strong personal opinions what's the best policy. But more important than what I believe the best policy is that we adopt a policy that will survive transitions in membership of the village council. That should be the number one goal of this council, is to establish a policy that will continue on when the faces around this table change.
I agree with you on that, because it makes no sense to have a policy and a plan that is not going to be implemented. Because then that plan is worse than not having one, because it's not being implemented. Two things I will point out, though. One is that, because I was around at the time, while there wasn't unanimous support for it, there initially was a plan that there was consensus around. plan around the box, a plan around how the funding was going to be done, and how it was going to be phased in over time, rather than just boom, all at once. Discomfort grew over time. So while I know we can commit and hope to commit to all those variables going forward, that doesn't necessarily mean that 2-3 years from now, someone else is going to become uncomfortable with it. How do we know? Because it happened. The other thing, just by way of analogy, to reinforce how much I agree with that we should have a plan, whatever it is, but even then it wasn't perfect. One can look at the new sidewalk construction. After TCD 2, there was consensus in the community, not unanimous, nothing's unanimous. There was consensus in the community that we should put a sidewalk on one side of every street. There were some neighborhoods thought that was great, some neighborhoods thought that wasn't so great, but that was the plan, that was the consensus. And there was more or less there was a box, which is here are all the streets in town that have no sidewalk on one side. So we know what our box is. That changed with annexations periodically, but more or less we knew what the box was. And we knew what the cost was. And we knew it was going to take 20 years or so to do it. And we knew there was a limit to how much construction could be done in any one construction season. So more or less there was a box, what all the sidewalks were in town, what the cost was, and what schedule it would take over time if funded consistently every year by multiple different councils. You would get to a conclusion where there was finally, the goal was achieved and there was a sidewalk on one side of every street. In practice, so yes, that's why I agree with you 100%, that's what we should do, because that's the only way that the sidewalk matrix got done. Otherwise, we would have never got done. But in practice, there were years when, for whatever reason, discomfort, bad economy, other pressing needs, the funding amounts for new sidewalk construction varied quite a bit. Actually happened with roads too, but that's another story. So on principle, I agree with you, and I think we should do that, but I think we should be cognizant of the fact, let's not fooling ourselves, that the next year or 2 years, things will happen, different people in this room, and people can grow discomfort with whatever plan it is. The community can change its consensus around something too. But all we can do sitting here today is the best we can.
Mayor, could I comment?
It's a workshop, jump right in.
So, I like what's been said so far. There's been, I think, a lot of good points that have been made so far. I appreciate the analogies and the idea of community consensus is something I'm interested in. I don't think we're ever going to reach some, everyone broad-based 95%, everybody's 95% of everyone that says this is the best idea.
Plus or minus 5%.
Right. So I think, but I do think we need to find some direction. And I think this is a policy question that has been with us, as Mayor, you pointed out, for 20 years. We've been debating this. There was some arguments have been made in the past that one of the reasons to adopt a stormwater utility is to provide a consistent, predictable funding source for stormwater projects, and that would be more consistent and predictable than property taxes. I think, from my perspective, what's been shown in the life of the stormwater utility is there's been so much discomfort with the utility itself that it's created more unpredictability than less. So, I personally have great concerns about the stormwater utility in general. However, I believe, it's my general belief, that we should continue maintaining our stormwater system and also conducting projects that are that provide essentially reasonable value to the taxpayers and provide community value. I mean, if the projects, and I think that it's an ongoing process to understand whether projects provide community value. And last week, or last time we met on this, I talked about the idea of referendum and that allowing referendum to be a source of gathering that community consensus, especially with regard to projects. I think that this, from my perspective, Commissioner White circulated this memo, which I appreciate, and it really boils down to, we should, what I take the memo as, and Mr. White, correct me if I'm wrong, is that what you're stating in the memo is we should commit to this 3.9 million number, so sort of the option one, option two, that number, which is consistent with this current plan, and then we should go forward, prepare some options, and then go forward with referenda questions that would inform us about what the community prefers, whether between 1 and 2 effectively, or eliminating the stormwater utility altogether. I like that approach. My concern, I guess, in the referendum question is, are we missing that first point? So the idea of, should we sort of do the split the difference, and then should we eliminate, or should we retain or eliminate the utility, and perhaps should we modify the utility? I can see those questions, but are we missing a sort of a fundamental question is, should we continue to improve the stormwater system in Downers Grove? Is there will the people to continue that? And I'm not suggesting that be the question directly, but a question of that nature is, do people, is this a number that people in the community are comfortable with? Should we continue spending $3.9 million and adjusted, through this plan yearly, an increasing amount starting at $3.9 million? Should we continue to do that as a community and make those significant investments? Is that something the community supports, regardless of whether it's through a tax or a fee or some other revenue system? Is that something the community supports? And I think that question is sort of as I've thought about the idea of questions, is that question really kind of the first step to open these further questions? I don't know if you want to.
Can I just jump in? I like Bill's plan, keeping it for 2017, but we need to have the money to do this, and there's a real problem in Downers Grove for stormwater. I mean, I don't know if it's,
Right.
Do people want to spend money on stormwater? It's not about just individual houses, it's about the entire community, it's about roads. I mean, stormwater is a huge problem. Do I like the fee? I do not like the fee. Do I want to see it go up every year? No, but I do think we need a system in place that we have to collect money and we have to fix this problem. Whether it's through taxes or fees, that's to be determined. I think going forward for 2017, collecting the money like we're collecting it, it's a good thing to do. And then we can decide, do we want a long-range plan? We can't be changing this every 2 years, like you said and what he said. We cannot change this every 2 years or every time faces change in this room. I mean, this is a real problem. There's so much flooding. People spend millions of dollars on.
Just very briefly, promise, very briefly. With respect to 17, the items being paid for, I don't think should be seen as controversial. And I think the time, in my opinion, the time to get to the question that you're asking is a question about capital projects and bond issuances. And since we won't be issuing any bonds in 17, the question of how big the box should be, we don't get to decide how big the box is going to be over the next 5 years, because we can only decide for 17. And in 17, we aren't initiating any new large-scale capital projects. There are no massive new projects in the FY17 budget. So the question, should we initiate a new massive capital project and enlarge the box, those of us fortunate to be elected in April of 17, they'll get to make that decision.
So what you're suggesting essentially is that my sort of additional question that I've kind of
It's premature.
is premature, and it would be germane perhaps at a future time.
And in addition to that, if somebody in the community believed adamantly that stormwater was not our business, I firmly disagree with that. But if someone were to believe that, they vote no, no, no on the 3 questions. And then that expresses stormwater shouldn't be. Also, I'm getting a little nervous because we're getting ahead. The public doesn't know the content of all this yet, so we're kind of having a discussion that those in the audience and those watching the TV haven't heard everything yet.
Right, but the
And that's
idea
why
of
we want a
referendum
survey as
question.
well as the referendum question too, to make sure there's full education. But I'm interrupting other people.
No, that's all right. For my part, I'm actually kind of surprised at the suggestion that there's not already consensus around at least one problem, and that is that stormwater is a problem. I'm not sure we need a referendum question for that. If there's somebody in Downers Grove who thinks that stormwater is not a problem, I haven't met him yet.
Well, see, in my experiences,
But
there
it's-
are people
But it's
in
about the
Downers
fee.
Grove.
It's not really about the storm.
That-
It's not
that's
really
my next
about-
point.
It's not
Yeah.
really about
It's a
the
funding
rain or
mechanism.
the water. The people you have met have a problem with the fee.
No,
And
no,
I have a
but
problem with the fee too,
there-
but.
I've met people
we-
in the community that say, I have a problem with the fee, because, and one of the reasons I have a problem with the fee is because I don't think this is a problem, and I don't think we should, if a property floods, it floods, and this is not our business, government. That's not the role of government. Now, that perhaps is a minority of people, and I'm not suggesting that that's a majority of people, but I'm suggesting that perhaps, I'm just throwing that out there as sort of a...
Just a point of clarification, let's recall that some of it is mandated to be our business by the federal government. Clean Water Act makes
Understood.
us do some things, we can't wash our hands of it, no pun intended.
Well,
Same with the county. There are
Understood.
local levels of government that make this our problem, we can't,
Right, and I'm not...
Can't walk away from it.
What I'm not suggesting is that we should spend,
Right.
$0
That's the same
and then
question
let the
on
whole
roads.
system fall
Yeah, that was
apart.
mainly on
Right,
roads.
right. But it's more on the capital side. So anyway, sorry.
No, that's fine. And I think Bill's had some reasonable points here that we can only commit ourselves so far. And to that extent, I guess we can have a plan, but it can always change. And I think that's some of the difficulty with some of the things you mentioned, Gina, is that, yes, we can worry about, we can't have this keep changing every 2 years, except there's always the possibility that it'll change every 2 years.
But stormwater won't go away.
No, I agree with that 100%. We have to have a plan to solve it. We can't simply throw up our hands. But I think when the stormwater utility was passed in 2011, did I get that right? 13, that the folks who passed it probably thought there was a consensus. And that has evolved over time. And it may evolve again. 5 years from now, folks may be sitting here saying, gosh, we really like that utility, can we get it back? You never know. Which is true. It could be totally wrong. I mean, but you could end up putting a referendum question on the ballot. It's 80-20 against the utility, and 10 years from now, everybody's thrilled that we got rid of the thing. That's entirely possible. But there's always the possibility that the community consensus will change around the idea of how we fund this. So I think what we have to do is make the best call we can now. I think the plan that we've got in place for what projects need to be done is a good one. The timetable is a reasonable one. Fact of the matter is that even if we wanted to put every dollar we get out of the utility or out of the property tax that's currently budgeted for stormwater, we really couldn't effectuate all of the maintenance that we need to do because we need to staff up in order to do it. But one way or the other, I think we stick to that piece of the plan, the capital and operations and maintenance ramp up. As for how we fund it, we've got a lot of interesting numbers up here. Commissioner White has, I think, a very interesting proposal. I've got no problem with going out to referendum. This is a question that's a core structure of government. And I think that is something that absolutely is, without a doubt, something that can and should go to the people. As far as I'm concerned, though, I want to make sure that we're solving the problems, getting value for what we're spending, and that means getting something that's effective and doing it at the lowest cost.
Okay. This has always been a two-part problem. One is the revenue, one is the expense. On the expense side, I can support the maintenance. We've already made that investment, so we should keep up with the maintenance. As far as going beyond that, I think some of the goals, 100% of the properties, 95% of the time, is just to, I don't know, can't get my head around that, don't know how you measure it, haven't seen measurements. Some of the 20%, I think there was something like 20% left, but 10% of it is in LPDAs. And I think at some point, you have to ask, if you're in an LPDA now, if if this is 20, 30 years ago, and you build on a swamp, maybe the public thinks maybe you should get some help. But on the other hand, being landlocked, you got developers and that want to build on swamps and swimming pools and everything else, and then we're going to come in and literally bail people out. And I think the last 20%, you're getting down to a point where maybe we're overreaching, maybe we're doing too much. I don't know. Maybe we should look at, rather than throwing a number up there and saying, let's spend this amount of millions of dollars to do all these projects to solve this problem. Maybe what we need to do is go case by case, go capital project by capital project to determine if it's appropriate, rather than these strange 100%, 95% of the time type of thing. That's one problem I have. I would rather go at this, same thing we do with the sidewalk matrix. There are a few places in town here where we didn't do sidewalks. So, as you get down there, you start adjusting the matrix, and maybe you don't do some of those projects. I think we need to ask those questions seriously. On the revenue side, yes, I've said numerous times, everybody I've talked to, it isn't just over the fence or over at the grocery store. It's a whole. It's literally thousands of people, phone calls and all kinds of stuff, and people don't like it. But I totally support. We ought to put this to bed once and for all, and ask the public: do they want a stormwater fee? Do they want it on their property taxes? And how much? So I mean, we could wordsmith the referenda that we have. I would also like, one of the sales pitches for the stormwater utility is that the property owners, taxpayers, were paying for all the stormwater, and they say, well, some people who should be paying and are presenting a problem aren't paying. So maybe, what we did was we created a stormwater utility, and we put extra people in that pot that we could charge, and they're paying a fee in addition to the residential property taxpayers. Somewhere along the line, we pulled out the nonprofits, which I totally supported and actually fought for, and I still agree with. But there are others that aren't paying in, that do present the problems, and they aren't the nonprofits. They aren't providing those types of services. They should be chipping in. So maybe what we should do is have a stormwater utility fee. My mouth, I can't believe I'm saying that. The stormwater utility fee, but exempt or pull out people who are residential property-owning taxpayers, and pull out the residents, let them pay for the same type of fees through their taxes, and then include those that otherwise would be exempt. Kind of a hybrid, If we pulled out one group before, well, why do we pull out the residents that really don't, that really would rather see it under property taxes? And that way you can still have a fee for the other groups that really weren't paying. My 2.5 cents.
Let me jump in on a couple things. You erased my stuff.
I know, I wanted, those boxes are important.
That's all right, you left me a corner I could draw in. That's all I need. You all remember the variables. I agree that variable number one, which is how big is the box, we should come to some decision on. That's not a referendum question.
Right.
You can't put that in a referendum because you put out a list of projects with associated dollars, and how do you vote on that? I think it's our responsibility to, working with the staff, who are stormwater engineers and people who actually build these projects, and oversee their building by others. You look at what are the projects that we should have and prioritize them as we currently do. So you have the high, medium, and low priority, like we did with the stormwater, with the sidewalk matrix. I don't see why we couldn't come up with that list. If we have an issue with the size of the box,
Mayor,
let's look at the box, but we should be able to decide that.
Could I ask a
That's
question?
actually a very important point right here.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to ask one question. I agree with this point. And my question is, do we have, what we said here is that the plan, quote unquote, the plan is 3.9 million, this revenue, right? That's the current plan.
Yeah, well, the other thing I want to do is tie
And-
back
and my
that
question-
39 to the 6 numbers, because I don't think that was obvious.
Well,
But we'll come back to that
before
later.
that, before we get to that, my question was, in line with what you just said about, that's our decision, what is that 3.9 million? What is that, 3.9 million, okay, we have $3.9 million, what are we going to do?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I was going to ask you, when you saw those numbers up here, you saw the 6 and the 8 and the 12.
Right.
When I asked what's the revenue under the current plan, the current box, and over a period of time, it was 6.9. Someone was probably looking, well, that number doesn't match these numbers, where are these numbers coming from? So I was going to ask, let's pause here, and I'll come back to what I was going to do in a second. Dave, if you can explain, what is the 3.9, and how does that relate to the numbers we were looking at earlier? Because they're different for a reason,
Okay.
so everyone understands. I'm
So
glad you
if
asked that question.
If you're following along in the audience or council members, the best place to look for an explanation of the plan is on page 47 of 61 of the PDF in the agenda, the agenda item itself on the website, which is page 47 of 61, which is also page 37 of the initial report. Apologize, we don't have hard copies of this in the room here tonight. So the idea was, we identified in 2005, in 2008-ish, 2005, 2008, the recommended level of service, both from an operation and maintenance standpoint and capital projects. So in 2005, we created the Stormwater Master Plan, and it said, here's what you need to do to operate and maintain your existing stormwater system, and here are the annual costs associated with that maintenance effort. So a master plan for maintenance in 2005 established the cost of owning and maintaining a system each year and for multiple years out. That set the O&M portion of the box. 2007, we created a capital projects plan called the WIP, Watershed Infrastructure Improvement. It identified and prioritized capital projects that should be completed. And it also established the cost, annual and multi-year, what we need, how much money we need to construct those projects. In 2012, when we were looking to create the stormwater utility, we hired a consultant to help us relook and basically make sure that those plans and those numbers were still correct. Those numbers were verified by the consultant. So we took the annual operations and maintenance expense, starting in year 2013 and going out for about 15, 20 years. And then we took the annual capital expenses, same time frame, 2013 going out for 30 years. That we called the recommended level of service, and we put together what that cost would be. In 2017, the recommended level of service would cost just under $8 million. Right, so we knew what it was going forward. $8 million in 2017, almost $11 million in 2029. One of the things they talked about, the council talked about, was should we immediately move to provide all that revenue to achieve the recommended level of service immediately? It was decided the answer to that was no. We would start at about 50% of the revenue requirements, half of the money that we need, and then ramp it up, increase the amount of revenue we receive each year, so that in about 15 years, we would go from half of the money we need to 100% of the money we need. So we established annual revenue requirements through two plans, the 2005 master plan, the 2007 capital plan. We projected those out, and we decided as a council and as a community that we would start with 50% funding and then move to 100% funding over about 15 years. So that's why the $3.9 million is the amount recommended to be spent in 2017, which constitutes just about half of the money we need. It's still in the 50 to 60% range.
And going back to your point, Bill, that's what we focus on, because that's all we can decide for 2017. We can't decide for 2018, we can't decide for 2019, we can decide for 2017, that's it. Because we have to pass a budget every year,
Let me
and
talk
levy
about-
every year.
Okay, I'll talk about the size of the boxes for a minute. But first, I want to start with this observation. If 4 or 5 of us were fully supportive of following option 1 and raising the stormwater utility fee 8% per year, we all wouldn't be here. The fact that we're here because there isn't consensus on the council to grow the fee as recommended in option 1. So we don't have that consensus right now. My second observation is that the box does not grow continuously or in a uniform way. It grows in jumps, leaps. And those leaps, in my observation, correspond with the issuance of large numbers of bonds. And therefore, that's part of why I believe if you bifurcate the revenue stream, that the 3.9 million is sort of ordinary operating. There's some capital in there, some debt service in there, but generally speaking, I think by and large, there's consensus that the ordinary day-to-day operation of the stormwater system is something that's not controversial. So that's something you put the stormwater fee on, because that's not controversial, that we do those things. And then we create
Let me stop you. Why that's not controversial is because you have to maintain and operate.
Well, absolutely, absolutely.
You have to do it. There's no choice there.
And because
Also not another question.
and because there's no choice there, I think there'll be a lot less pushback on the fee if it's spent on that purpose. Okay, but each time you greatly enlarge the box because you issue maybe, whether it's one phase or two, either $10 million of bonds once and $10 million a few years later, or all at once. In any event, that large jump, each future council can make its own decision whether they feel that bond issuance needs a referendum. We can't tell them, you shouldn't want a referendum to do these 17 capital projects. They get to decide that themselves. We can say, we think you shouldn't, but we can't tell them that.
Or you think you should?
We think you should, yeah, either way. But, so therefore, we only decide what's within our purview to decide, which is the 2017 budget. I think the genesis of the storm utility fee 25 years ago was to provide a stable revenue stream. And we provide that stable revenue stream for those portions of the stormwater budget which has very little controversy. And in that way,
I have to disagree with something Commissioner White said, and that's that it's easily explainable and that people will generally support funding O&M with stormwater utility fee. Probably the second most populous complaint that I've received about the stormwater utility fee is that you guys are charging me this and I don't see much improvement.
Right.
My basement's still flooding.
Right.
People expect us to solve problems with the funding that we're getting.
Yes.
And we're solving them, but it's coming slowly because of the ramp.
And that's the same thing with the sidewalk makers.
Right.
Where people said, we're paying taxes to go towards new sidewalk construction. I remember 147 on the list. By the time I see a sidewalk on my block, my kids will have kids.
Right.
But the difference is that rather than the general tax, this is a fee. Fee implies that I'm getting a service, fee for service
Well, I think
model.
that's what Commissioner White's getting at.
And that to Commissioner Jose's point, I think, I'm not certain, from a conceptual perspective, from a, philosophical perspective, I agree with what Commissioner White has said, that it is much easier to justify philosophically a fee for the maintenance of a system that exists than to justify it for capital projects which are in specific areas. It's philosophical. But when it gets down to the nuts and bolts, I don't know if that translates down beyond the philosophy of maybe some people that look at this all the time to, the people of Downers Grove. And so that's one of the reasons I think referendum is so important.
But the philosophy changes too, because what is viewed to be logical and defensible, justifiable, we've seen it change over time and it'll change again.
Sure.
Which is why I get a little nervous with too many things being decided by referendum, because then you're running referendums every 2 years. You might as well be polling everybody as to, should we fix this street? Let's take a poll. That's not a very wise way to run a government. But let me throw a couple of pieces.
I disagree with that, but
Well, you and I have fundamental disagreements on governance. in that regard. I think we're elected to govern, and every 2 years, the people get to decide who represents them. That is a referendum in its own nature. Referendum, in my opinion, should be used to provide guidance to those who govern. And I think there are some arguments here for where some guidance could be important, and let me explain why. But I do think we need to, the box is the box, because we can identify what the projects are. And that's not something that's a debate. Prioritizing them is subject to some debate.
I think there is debate about the total level of service.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so the box isn't the box.
But I mean, you can come up. The
box for 17.
The box for 17 is, in my opinion, the box.
But you can come up with a list of projects. How long that list is, where you draw the line, understanding you have to pay to maintain things, how many new projects you build, which increases your level of service, bless you. All those things, yes, can be discussed, but I think you can come up with those. Then the question becomes, how important of an issue it is and over what period of time are we going to spend on it? There are those who wanted the sidewalks built in our town in 5 years, not 20. And there are those that thought they should never be built. And you're going to have various opinions across the whole community on those issues. And you're going to have the same kind of discussion with respect to stormwater, too. I think it should, I want my problem fixed now. Someone else says, I don't have any problems, why should I pay for it? You're going to have that until the cows come home. But a lot of those things I think we should be able to decide as elected people who are elected by, at large in this community to make decisions based on information and input and our own processing of information. I think we should make those decisions. There are things where we can seek guidance from the community, and I think there are appropriate times we do that. How to pay for this? Fee versus taxes. I think that may be a legitimate question now, and here's why. Some of the times I have concerns about putting these complicated issues out there because it is near impossible to properly inform and educate everyone to the level necessary in order to make an informed decision. It's very, very, very difficult, particularly given some restrictions on what the village can do vis-a-vis a referendum. It's just tough. Now, however, the community has experienced both worlds. The community has experienced paying for stormwater entirely with property taxes, and for the last few years, the community has experienced paying for it with a fee. The community has an experience with it. So I think there's a level of education that didn't exist 5 years ago in understanding what the differences are. But just as a reminder, and I'll be brief because I don't want to keep everybody here all night, but what were some of the reasons why this was shifted over to a fee in the first place? It was said, and I'm not debating this, I'm just making observations, that a fee as opposed to a tax was more logical. Why was it more logical? But these are the questions that people need to understand if they're going to give us guidance through a referendum question. Why was it said to be more logical? Because what does the relationship between runoff of a property have to do with the value of that property? Answer is none. Value of your house has nothing to do with how much runoff you generate. Zero. Or I'm sorry, more precisely, your equalized assessed valuation has no relationship to the amount of runoff that you generate. If you have a very expensive house and generate very little, if you have a property that isn't very expensive, a parking lot, that generates a lot of runoff.
And that applies to a lot of government services.
I agree.
And the state constitution has a provision that properties can only be assessed based on value.
I'm not going to get into the legal argument right now because currently they are legal and they exist in Illinois and elsewhere. But that was one of the points, is that it made more sense, like with water, to be a user-based fee. The more water you drink out of the system, the more you pay. We don't pay for water through our property taxes, we pay for water through a fee. And there's some control over that. The more you drink, the more you pay. It's sort of the inverse in that. And that was the next point, which was supposedly, or it was said, that a fee was more equitable than a property tax, both for the reason I just mentioned and because our research at the time indicated that single-family residences in the village of Downers Grove, under a property tax-based system, were paying about 70% of the cost of the box, and yet we're only generating about 50% of the runoff. And that inequity grew over time. Where single-family residents, which are the primary residents in our community, were paying a disproportionate share of the stormwater burden. Some people cared about that, some people didn't care about that. Some people argued, I don't care because I can write off my property taxes on my taxes. We looked at that, and that's true for some people, and it's not. But again, this isn't right or wrong. This is, in some degrees, like what color should we paint the wall? Blue or red? People can have reasonable differences on it. But I'm just going through what the reasons were at the time. Third was that and this has been mentioned already, that a fee was more reliable. It was a dedicated source, solely dedicated to stormwater capital operations and maintenance, and because it was our own fee, we collected it, it wasn't interfered or at risk by the state of Illinois, which property taxes can be frozen. There's been legislation introduced to do that. Sales tax is highly unreliable. We'd like to drive it up very high, but we all have to admit that it does this. That was one of the reasons behind it, and for something that was viewed to be important in the community, having that reliable funding source that was solely within our control was viewed to be an advantage. Accountable. It has been said that a fee is more accountable than a property tax because if I went back 5 years and challenged any of this room to find where on their property tax bill the line was for stormwater projects, you couldn't find it. No such thing. Because property taxes were collected, they went into a pool, and they were applied to various projects. Now, everyone in this room can go pull out their water bill and tell me exactly how much they pay towards the stormwater utility. It's just right there as a line item on your bill, making it highly visible. And people ask those questions. I'm paying X. I want to know what I got out of it for Y. It's more visible and more accountable. And again, you can argue that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just recapping what some of the issues were. And then last, there was a final, and I'm not rhyming these on purpose. Actually, I am. The utility was viewed to be more responsible in that because there was a credit system and because there was a heightened awareness about stormwater and runoff and its effects and the Clean Water Act, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and to some extent, again, whether you like the current system of credits or not, they're not enough, set that aside because all that can be tweaked. The question was because individuals can take some control of the amount of runoff they generate and get credits against the fee, it raised the awareness of the importance of stormwater management and therefore was a more responsible approach to it because it created education and awareness and people would take steps to actually do something that would be better off for the entire community. But those were the reasons why primarily there was arguments for it. My point now is on a referendum question, we now have had years of this experience. The people have lived under the old one, they've lived under the current one. I think the community is probably well enough informed because they've lived in both worlds to make a decision. Do I like this better, or do I want to pay for it with my property taxes? Or they might tell us they want to pay for it with something else. But that's where I think that kind of that guidance might be appropriate at this point in time. Some of the other things I disagree with you on, but this issue, in all fairness, I think the community has seen both worlds.
Right, I agree.
And they can tell us, say whether they like it or not.
To the point about accountability.
Can I say one last thing? Very important, and I'll stop talking for a while. Frankly, whether we do it under a fee, or we do it under property taxes, or we find oil in our village hall, or we do a hybrid system, that is not the most important thing to me. The most important thing to me is that we identify what our projects are and we properly fund them.
I want to know why you've been hiding the oil under village hall.
That's why we're not moving it.
Or until the new one is going to buy it and they drill.
I agree with you 100% on we need to fund, one way or the other, we have to fund the solution. And that's actually, excuse me, part of why I think number 4 is probably the most important piece here. The accountability and to put another word to it, transparency of it. And Commissioner White was right. No, true. The prior councils haven't increased the fee to the recommended level on multiple occasions, but at least that's out there in the community now. We know it's forced more of a conversation than I think has ever taken place before. And if we put it back on the property tax, we lose that transparency. And but whether it's on the property tax or the fee, one way or the other, we know that the revenue that we have now is insufficient to solve the problems we have. So the question is begged, will the property tax increases that are necessary be agreed to by this council, future councils?
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's fee or
One year at a
property
time
tax,
is all we
it's
can
got to
say.
go up. And if we're going to solve these problems, the question is how much and when.
Regarding those points for basically continuing, option 1, staying the course with the plan that was adopted in the summer of 2012, I believe, I've come to believe in the last week or two that the community should be given the option to embrace the plan that was adopted in August 2012. And if a majority of the community embraces that plan, if the majority of the community agrees with those 5 points, the community's decided. I don't plan on spending much more time between now and when we resolve it debating, because I don't necessarily, I mean, I can nitpick all those points, but that's beside the point. That's really beside the point. The point is to have a process, because whether I'm right or wrong in a day doesn't really matter. What really matters is, do we adopt a plan that we aren't back here in 2 or 3 or 4 years having this same discussion again? You know, and that's really, so that's why I want to hear. We probably will anyways.
happen anyway.
That could happen anyways, but at least we'll make the effort to avoid that. So that's what
I agree on that.
you know, I'm seeing referendum questions that cover the range, so that there's an opportunity for the community to say, you know, I like those 5 points. You know, so that's why that was included as an option, to give, you know.
Well, and that particular kind of guidance I think is important, because the community now knows they've driven automatic and they've driven stick. They can decide what kind of car they want now.
Right.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what I've heard, at least from what I've heard it sounds like there's a number of council members, and perhaps a majority of council members have said that for 17, there's a desire to stay with this planned amount. And I think I've heard every council member say that there's a desire for referendum on this point.
I wouldn't go so that far. I wouldn't be opposed to one, because I think now the circumstances are changed. I mean, I'll just make it very clear. I think the plan that was put into place a number of years ago was a good plan. It was a reasonable plan.
People didn't
get behind it after originally adopting it. But my preference would be that we should stick with what the original plan was and properly fund it. That being said, this is about consensus and about achieving some resolution amongst 7 people that have different opinions. There's even more opinions in the community. If there was some hybrid version of what I just said that made, actually I think Commissioner Patimo said it very well, is let's address the problem. I'm about addressing the problem. And if it's not exactly the way I would like it addressed, that's less important than addressing the problem.
Understood.
So I don't need, I don't need a referendum for that. But I think that if this council wanted input from the community, advisory referendum on the, did you like it better, did you like chocolate or did you like vanilla? Fine, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to promote it, but I'm not going to,
And pulling
I'm not going to oppose it. I would welcome the ability to actually help craft the language so that we truly get guidance on the issue.
And eliminating the 3.9 million question as a variable from our discussion this year focuses then more on the method of funding rather than the size of the box. Size of the box is not in part of any of these questions. It's simply how to pay for the box.
Correct. And what
I'm good with that.
Correct.
What I want to say before we say that's done and dusted.
Well, we can't, because Barnett's going to show up next week, and he's going to have to leave.
But before we say that's done and dusted, the one point I wanted to make is that I think there is, I just want to reiterate that point that I made earlier. I think there's been a lot of talk here tonight that everyone agrees that we need to continue to maintain and stay on this plan. And I don't think that necessarily is the case. But I think that's, given where we are right now, I think the key point is reaching some consensus about how to move forward. It sounds to me like there is that consensus, and I'm fine with that. And so focusing on then how do we craft questions on this point about fee versus tax is really where we should focus our efforts.
So that might be a good sort of gut check moment?
Yes, that's a good gut check moment, and also probably a good time to break and hear from the audience, who's been very patient, listening carefully, and I'm sure has comments and input and questions they want to provide. Because we're not deciding anything finally tonight, let me make that very clear. And we haven't heard from Commissioner Barnett, who was unavoidably not able to attend tonight. He's fine. But I agree with what you just said, in that there are some who would like to do more than the current plan. There are some who would like to do less than the current plan, but for 17, to have consensus to go forward, I think there probably is that consensus to at least do that. I tend to agree with you.
Can we
So,
get a head nod on that at least? I know that's not a complete, we're not deciding anything tonight, but is that what we're hearing, that there is among the council members general support for?
I think there's some would like to do more, there's some would like to do less, and some would like to do the same. That probably equals out to what you have written there.
So I don't see any objections, so I'll just keep that on the board for now.
I'm not going to erase it. All right, then why don't we take a pause, unless anybody wants to say
No,
anything.
I'd like to hear from the public
Say,
also.
let's pause and give members of the audience an opportunity to say something, ask questions, whatever they would like, and then we can always continue our conversation. But based on the discussion so far, anyone in the audience have any questions? Can we don't need a microphone or anything, do we? You probably just stay there. You wouldn't mind just speaking up, so making sure that folks at home can hear you.
Sure, my name is John Kohovic. I live at 406 Lincoln Avenue. I'd have to agree with Mayor Tully. I think the list that you put there, I'd like to be able to see that on a bill. But I'd also like to see that there's something's happening. I happen to be a recipient of water coming downstream, from the buildings that are going, that's happening uphill of me. And so it's ending up in a couple of neighbors' yards, and their electric bills have gone through the roof because some pumps are constantly going out. So it seems we're replacing a lot of these homes that are, 1,000 square foot homes with 3,600 square foot basements of 10 feet, and there's no accountability for that on some of the other residents that have been there for 14, 15 years like I have myself. The other thing I'd like to bring attention to is everything we've talked about here is about the residents paying these fees. I think someone had brought it up about parking lots generating more of this water. How about some of the commercial businesses in town? Currently with the Planning Commission, there's a plan to put in a couple of dealerships right on Ogden Avenue that will cover almost 10 acres of property. And in both those cases at the meetings that I have been at, part of their answer is to dump that into wetland that is privately owned. So I'd like there to be some participation in these fees by the commercials in town here.
Thanks for your comment. A couple things. Number one, part of what you're talking about is zoning and building code issues and setbacks and whatnot, which relates to this, but is another conversation. But fair point. Oftentimes with the businesses, that is not, especially new commercial developments, that's not lost on us. And while they may not pay, they pay a fee too, ultimately. But they, in addition, oftentimes are required as a condition of the development to, and I can't speak to the situation you just mentioned because it hasn't come before us yet, so I'm speaking in past.
It's about to.
Well, when it does, when it does, if and when it does, then we'll address it. But oftentimes they are required to spend considerable amounts of money to do things about keeping water on site. And that's not just necessarily our requirement, that's our requirement, but that's also a county requirement.
But also on this discussion is operations and management and the cost of that ongoing,
Right.
Dealing with that runoff and all of that water and what has to be done.
It's a very good point, and you're right.
Because engineers have made mistakes before, and, things happen.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, we have an area along Lee Street that floods, and we've seen the village out there pumping that out.
Right.
Purchasing houses and so forth. And I bet you at some point in time, an engineer thought that was a good idea to build Ogden Avenue and not accommodate some of that water.
There's certainly a higher level of appreciation and awareness of those issues today and going forward than there have been, say, 20 years ago, no doubt about it.
Mayor, if I could just augment a couple of those comments. Number one, the idea of increased regulation to mitigate and minimize the negative impacts of stormwater from new development that is actually currently being addressed by this village. It just hasn't gotten to this council yet. The staff, based on the direction provided at the last council discussion, will be proposing more strict regulations on detention, setbacks, all sorts of things that are designed to mitigate negative impacts of runoff. That will be in front of our Stormwater and Floodplain Oversight Committee in the next coming months. So that speaks to the regulation. We're keenly aware of it, the council's keenly aware of it, and have directed us to take a look at more stringent regulations.
Thank you.
On the other issue about contributions from commercial and industrial properties towards the stormwater costs in the system, under the stormwater utility fee system we have right now, commercial properties contribute 39% of the revenue, industrial properties contribute 9%. So what is that, 48%, if I can do math in my head? Under the property tax, that number drops to only 24% contribution. Thanks, Mayor.
Unless maybe you had a hybrid system.
Yeah, so I got a comment that I want to piggyback on it.
Sure, please.
So related.
I'll let you guys arm, or you guys flip a coin.
Red and Lee Avenue.
And by the way, if everyone wouldn't mind just introducing themselves, we're all neighbors, please.
Caddis and, okay. So, I want to get this straight. So in light of the fact that the council is considering, well, first of all, I don't care how it's funded. I think you need to fund it somehow. Stormwater utility fee, I'm okay with that conceptually. Personally, as a personal reasons why I think it kind of sticks in my craw, but I won't get into that. But I think so. So the important thing is to do the projects that need to be done. And what you just mentioned, Mr. Phelan, about things that be presented about that affect new developments, that's cool. I applaud that. On the second page of your report for today, your part of it was what capital improvements should be made to the stormwater system. So, question mark. So, in my mind, the answer to that was in light of the fact that the council is considering the Packey West development and the stormwaters on Lee and Ogden, which is like 11 acres worth of development from essentially 1 acre. So that's a big development potentially. And the fact that the village had to take the, what I consider extreme action of purchasing 5 homes and spending money to demolish them as a stormwater management tactic, which is extreme. On Lee Avenue, really close to the stormwaters and really close to this planned Packey Web development. And they did it because of the flooding that was happening, you know, maybe 200 feet away from stormwaters in Lee and Ogden. So I think the village, before any of these projects move forward, make the capital improvement needed to alleviate the existing flooding, which increases every year in this area. And this needs to be done, that project needs to be at the top of the list, I think. Real close to the top of the list and not tagged on at the bottom.
Thank you. Gordon?
Yes, thank you. This is a very interesting discussion, and you've touched on some points that I would like to emphasize. The first is that this point that the manager Fieldman made, that this discussion of how to pay for the stormwater management that the village considers its responsibility, it goes on in parallel with using police powers to try to reduce the amount of stormwater management the village has to do. And so I greatly applaud that pronged approach. I would like you also to consider that there are other things that are going on in the community, like the reduction of the tree canopy, like the intrusion on wetlands, that have serious stormwater costs to the community. And so in addition to looking at your regulations for new construction, you should also be looking at proposals related to your comprehensive plan. In 1965, when you were adopting your first zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan, there was a very thoughtful drainage conservation proposal from Martin Ashman, I guess it was. You should look at that again. There are areas of the village, some of them have been built, some of them have not been built, that play a very important water management function. And one of the things your planning department should be doing in cooperation with the Park District is trying to use these existing features of the village to water manage. That's a much cheaper way to go than building pipes. And so right now, we're playing catch-up, and in particular, the village has been acquiring properties that are built in these water management features and contribute to very expensive remedial measures that the village has to take. So I'm saying that you should have essentially a three-pronged approach. Look at how you're going to pay for the things that water management responsibilities you feel properly belong to the village or have been imposed upon the village by outside agencies. Look at how you can regulate the future development so that it doesn't create as much of a water management burden for the village as the past has. But also look at how you can use the natural features of our community to reduce the water management burden that the village has. And then the last point I want to make is in connection with the suggestion about fees associated with development. As long as you're considering a fee component to supporting the water management responsibilities of the village, I think we should also be looking at charging a fee for residential developments that greatly change the water management responsibilities in a neighborhood. Residential development as well as commercial development often creates completely different water management problems in the community. We've seen that, and you have examples coming to you of that. There has to be some way in which you can impose that fee for treating these consequences of the development on the people who are creating that problem for the village. And so it's another aspect of the issue that the mayor raised. How else, besides the things that we've already looked at, property tax and fee based on impervious area, should we be paying for the village's water management responsibilities? And I think you could make a good case, and the staff should study how you can impose a fee associated with the expanded water management burden that new development makes to the village. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Actually, I follow up on that and that staff. Is there any precedent anywhere for an impact fee related to a change in the previous area upon the issuance of a building permit?
I have good news for Dr. Goodman and all the commissioners here. That fee exists. It's required under county ordinance. It's called cash in lieu of detention. And it's basically, you figure out what stormwater detention would be required if that detention is not constructed on the site because it doesn't meet the minimum threshold. Then you actually calculate the cost of the village providing that detention. That is based on a county formula paid to us. So that fee does exist. One of the key policy questions then is what is the land value associated in cost of construction? What should that ultimate fee be?
Not for this evening, not to put you on the spot, but in either future manager's report or such other venue you think is appropriate, can you brief us on how that fee is calculated, how much revenue has come in based on that fee, and what are the legalities if we were to consider increasing that fee?
Will do.
And then that can be just as, and then it should be reported this way in the public packet, so all members of the community can learn this, gain the same information.
We will do that, and I think it's also going to come up in that Stormwater Floodplain Oversight Committee as part and parcel to these regulations. Thank you.
If I could add to that,
Industry.
some of the impact, we've heard from a number of neighborhoods where developers have come in and clear-cut trees. And, not just a tree here or there, but they actually do some serious clear cutting. And so part of the impact would be the damage that they have done to the...
The tree demolition fee.
Yeah.
On private property? That's a referendum question.
Well...
Based on the impact of stormwater.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know, it's what do they call it, tricky wicket? But
Sticky wicket.
Sticky wicket, that was it.
Isn't that the Mr. T tax?
With those sort of comments, I think
Not quite. Anyway, several neighborhoods have complained quite a bit about the impact of clear cutting of actual forest to get the work done, and that should be worked in somehow. I don't know.
Just a thought. I'm good for now.
Thank you for waiting.
Okay, hi, my name is Peter Hux. I live at 6135 Hillcrest, Dunham, near Downers Grove South. Thank you very much for preparing this report, and also I like the visual you did earlier about, you know, the boxes and all that. I just wanted to raise a couple of things on your report. I'm more finance-oriented. I rely on the council to decide what our priorities are going to be. We obviously need to do improvements in the community here, but from a numbers standpoint, what really resonated with me in this report was in the key concept section on page 3, where it indicates that each $1 million in revenue generated by stormwater fees essentially costs me 55% less if I pay a stormwater fee than if I pay taxes. So at the end of the day, I kind of look at it like, well, you can allocate some to stormwater, you can allocate some toward tax, but you know, I'm really more interested in what's the total amount that I'm looking at. And according to this report, I, as a consumer, am better off if we maintain the stormwater fee entirely. So I think you need to consider that as you go deeper into investigation. The second point I would like to make is that when I looked at the revenue breakdown based on stormwater fee versus taxes, it's interesting in that when you look at the typical amount paid by a home on an annual basis, it appears that there's about 30,000 units that contribute revenue from the stormwater fee approach. And when I looked at the tax basis, there's only about 20,000. Did I miss something there, or is that right? And explain. I thought we, you know, we weren't paying. If you were tax exempt, you weren't paying. So I thought, you know, there'd be a 1-to-1 ratio.
First of all, I want to congratulate you. You have constructed from a little bit of data the basis of households and ERUs. So fantastic math and deploying concepts. So basically, I'm saying you're correct. There's probably a little bit, 18,000 in some parcels, 29,000 in some total ERUs. An ERU, an equivalent residence runoff unit, is about 3,200 square feet of impervious area. So I think your math is about spot on. But the ERU, the basis for the fee is based on the total calculation of impervious area.
So parcels that have more than one ERU.
But follow up on that. Can you address why does it cost more to generate $1 million in revenue through one approach than the other? That I didn't get.
It's the distribution, and it's the cost burden. So because we said a typical house pays, what we're really doing is these fluctuations are based on the cost burden itself. In the utility model, it's about 50% on the residential side, thank you, 40% commercial, 10% industrial. On the property tax levy, the residential component of land uses account for 76% of the cost burden. So that's why if I take $1 million, 76% of that $1 million, then one model is paid and tax model is paid by residences. If I take that same $1 million, only 52% of it.
Okay, so you're just restricting it to individual residences as opposed to each giving unit.
Right, what I did is we spread it across land use categories, and then within the one land use category, residential, we picked a typical house.
I see. So
That's
this
how
is really residential centric. It's not really looking at, you know, the total revenue profile based on if I'm a commercial and industrial or if I have.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Is that coming at some point? Because that really gets to item number 4 on there, the accountability.
Yeah, what you could do is you could consult that table on page 3 under key concepts. You can see the breakdown by category. Within the categories, in the residential, there's 3 tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, and they apply different ratios of ERUs. But on the commercial and industrial side, the amount of impervious area on each parcel is actually measured in the fees based on the actual measurements. So we can provide that data. I think we provided it in the past when we created the utility. So we do have that, we can share that.
And this is an iterative process, right? I mean, we're just getting going here, so to speak. so we'll see more.
We've
left the shore, but we've got a long way to roll.
Okay, well, on that specific point about how much is paid by residential and commercial properties, it's my understanding, and I'd like to be corrected if I'm wrong about this, that, to put it in very real terms, there's large swaths of parking lots with the commercial properties on Butterfield Road, and there's large swaths of parking lots at 75th and Lamont. And they pay considerably more under the utility fee model, because the property is not taxed at a very high rate for property tax purposes, but there's a lot of impervious area.
So let's keep it that way.
Well, yeah, except the flip side of that argument is that makes it harder to have a successful sales tax producing business at that location. So,
Right.
and those two areas the water does not run into where they don't have any flooding problems. And that goes to the fairness of a fee. Okay, for example, when we get to the fairness of a fee, there's a portion of Downers Grove south of 75th Street. All the water flows southeast to Salt Creek. The rest of Downers Grove flows west to the east branch of DuPage River. Nottingham does not need a penny of capital improvements for stormwater because their water goes the other way. Now, if it's a fee, I have a conceptual problem with the fairness of that because they will never use the capital projects that we're building. Now, it's not a large area, but that's where I have a conceptual breakdown. If there's a part of the village where the water does not flow into a project that we need to build, they're not contributing to the problem, they won't benefit from the problem, how can we charge them a fee to fix the problem they are contributing to? We can charge them a tax, that's perfectly appropriate.
That's true for a lot of people, actually.
So,
Yeah, and that's part of the distinction.
could I jump in on this point? The residential versus commercial, is an important point. I look at one of the things I look at is I think it's lost in a lot of people. We hear with property tax, but for example, the fact that in Cook County that the commercial property is assessed at a different rate than residential property. So in Cook County, residential property, the assessed value is 10% of market value, and the assessed value of commercial property in Cook County is 25% of market value. So effectively in Cook County, a commercial property of this, $250,000 commercial property, or it doesn't matter, a commercial property, same value as residential property, the commercial property pays 2.5 times more taxes because of the way the value is assessed. Well, in DuPage County, it's all properties assessed at a third of market value, and so therefore residential and commercial. So if you look at towns like Roselle is some in Cook County and some in DuPage County. You look at the DuPage, the commercial sector in Roselle in DuPage County, very good. The commercial sector in the Cook County side, there's a lot of vacancies, a lot more.
That's our robust sales tax plan.
And
Pointing to Cook County.
well, but the point I'm trying to make here is that there's one argument that obviously there's an argument that says, oh well, let's push more to the size of the commercial, right? Well, that's effectively what Cook County has done, is through that, or if that's the state has done, but effectively commercial pays a lot more than residential. It affects businesses pay an extraordinarily large amount more taxes than residential. Well, if we create a situation in Downers Grove where our businesses pay considerably more than businesses in Westmont or in Woodridge or other neighboring communities, then we could be subject to some of the same issues at the Cook-DuPage.
Sure.
And so that's something I would want to avoid.
Sure, well, and that's a fair point.
And I wanted to just sort of throw that out there.
That's a fair point, because anything that's viewed as an additional burden on a business, you can argue that somehow hampers their ability to generate the robust environment that we need for good sales tax, clearly, and that's a consideration no matter what. But it's about balance, and I think what we were trying to do back then was not, oh, hey, let's go tax the bejeebus out of the commercial so we can save our residents. It was looking at this from a an equitable standpoint where let's look at contributors. And again, we can talk all night long about the proper way to measure the contribution. That can be altered. But the idea, the concept was, let's look at who the contributors are and let's more evenly spread out the cost and include more payers, as Commissioner Waldeck mentioned earlier, because of the original iteration of this, not-for-profits were not excluded. Well, they generate runoff. And again, we've had this argument before, I won't go into it again, but some would say that they don't get free water either. If you drink the water, you pay for it. This is kind of the reverse of it. But as originally conceived, the idea was let's spread it out and include more payers. So yes, you're generating more money for stormwater projects, and it's being more evenly distributed. Now, when something is more evenly distributed, someone who's been paying less now complains they're paying more. Someone who's been paying more, who's not paying less, is happy. So,
Right.
but you're right.
I just look
You're
at.
right in effect.
Right.
But in concept, it wasn't designed to, hey, let's jack up the price of the commercial to subsidize the residential. It was trying to spread it out more.
Understood, and I see, I can really see both sides. I mean, you know, on one hand, I totally agree.
You can't see both sides.
Right, I totally agree with that. On the other hand, you know, you look at you look at some of our major commercial areas, 75th and Lamont Road. Well, the north side of 75th Street is in Downers Grove. The south side is in Woodridge and Darien. And if they don't have this fee, they're effectively paying less than the business that would choose to be in Downers
I
Grove.
think there have been problems at 75th and Lamont a lot longer than there's been a stormwater utility.
Well, right, but I'm just suggesting, and similar with Butterfield.
He wasn't making a causation argument.
Right, that's certainly not the cause, but it's just a factor as we're looking to, you know, on another hand, do a sales tax enhancement strategy, which we talked about 2 weeks ago.
Sure. Thank you for waiting.
Todd Purvis, you guys were talking about making some adjustments to the stormwater utility, assuming it goes forward, and I saw some of those in there, setbacks on lot sizes. I think one of the things you want to consider, and I've probably talked to you about this before, is the impervious. I mean, just because you have a lot of impervious doesn't mean you have a lot of runoff. It should be tied to the size of your lot too, because you could have a large house on a huge lot and not be dumping hardly any into there, but yet you're getting taxed for it. So it's only two more calculations. You have the GIS, just take the land, you already know what the impervious is, subtract, and again, it's gonna have to be formula driven, and it's gonna have to be uniform, and at the end of the day, it might not even matter that much. But it's just something to consider on that. And then the other thing is, you talked about, Dave, the fee in lieu of detention, and that money that comes in, where does that money go? Hopefully into the stormwater utility.
It goes into the stormwater fund, and for those that follow our budget, you can see it's, there's another line item for that, other contributions, something like that, measured in tens and hundreds of thousands, not millions, but yes, we do have it.
That's part of the issue.
Please.
Carissa Doherty, I live at 318 Fifth Street. I'm very grateful to Dr. Goodman for summarizing the three kind of key points that he brought up. I really appreciate the council bringing the idea of regulations to the discussions about stormwater. The idea, the idea you just mentioned about assessing fees based on, impermeability per lot. And it's a very good distinction as well as looking at the overall, system of Downers Grove properties and land, and looking at trees and other ways of mediating stormwater beyond the kind of engineering solutions that I think are important. And I just wanted to bring up the second point, or the fourth point actually, having to do with the fee for what is it called? The fee that the developer would pay to release, to kind of get away with making a property that has a lot of stormwater. That I think that there might, because a developer doesn't have necessarily an investment in the neighborhood, they're not going to live there, they don't live in the house. A lot of times they're building a house and they're selling it quickly and moving on. Another approach, rather than, or maybe an additional approach, rather than imposing a fee, would be to have maybe a credit or a way of, encouraging people, developers, to incorporate more features into the property that actually improve the property, so that when the homeowner comes in after the developer's gone and he's paid his fee or not, and then there's landscaping features or other types of features, permeable pavers, for example, that actually improve the property, and then the homeowner can live with that and actually has that benefit continuing, and also has the benefit of living in a house that actually, they feel good about, and then that the neighborhood feels good about, rather than having this developer that says, okay, see you later, and we're done.
Those are great concepts. Two points. One is some of those best management practices for stormwater management are now required. Recent code amendments, I think we made them a couple years ago, are now required by the county ordinance, which we follow. And then I think it was last year or the year before, this council lowered the threshold at which those best management practices have to be provided.
Significantly.
So that basically every new house and every
What did it go from, 2,500?
down to
Down to 700.
700 square feet. So that best management practice concept is now in place here in Downers Grove as a requirement. And in addition to that, the stormwater fee you pay can be reduced through credits that are granted exactly for those things you mentioned. So thank you.
Thank you. Sir, in the back, did you have your hand up? I thought.
You can go, I'll catch up.
Okay, sorry, and then here, please.
I'm going to refer to your example of the box. I believe that it's this council's responsibility to decide how big that box is and where the money is divided between capital projects and maintenance. It's your responsibility. We elected you to do this. You need to do it sooner rather than later. The new people have been here almost a year, and we're talking about this. And you could probably add a third dimension to that box. Your wishes going to the future, that we would recommend to future councils that you operate at this level or increase or decrease. But you need to take some action. We're talking about this for a year with the new people, and nothing's been done. If you're going to have a referendum, an advisory referendum, it should be on how you're going to pay for it. The hybrid, taxes, or the utility. No other discussion.
Thank you. Yes.
Jim Smalley, 246 56th Street, Downers Grove, Deer Creek subdivision. Obviously, well-known area. And Commissioner Jose, as you were saying, 96, 02, 04, 08, 13. It's just going to be a matter of when it happens again, right? And that's the problem. I think a lot of the things around the box, Mayor Tully, and I appreciate that drawing as well, is the O&M part of it. Because for the last 30 years, there has been no O&M in the Deer Creek subdivision. Thus, we're in the situation that we're in now. It's a capital project that's been identified as a priority project following the 2013 flooding event, which has me a little concerned because I see this as a priority action item discussion tonight. And if we were a priority action item back in 2013 and we're not even on the agenda until 2018, I'm a little concerned about that as some action being done. Because that's the problem. It's not whether it's taxes or the utility fee. It's stick or car, but if there's no gas to push the car and action isn't being taken, it's not going to get done. And people are getting fed up with that. That's what the frustration is within the village. It's the no action to address one of the biggest safety concerns the village has. Stormwater is up there with police and fire. Because if people aren't safe from water coming into their homes or damages and getting around town, it's going to be a big problem for the community as a whole, not just the subdivision, even though we are one of the probably hardest hit areas in the area that has yet to have anything done.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Fieldman, for issuing my outline. Just a brief recap, I'm paying twice the fees my neighbor is, even though my property or impervious property is only 15% of the total property. Then the last page shows the rain gardens and various impact there. On the new utility report, I was hoping to find a line item for adjusting the fee, recalculating it, and didn't find that, so I'm hoping it's still on the table.
I think, just to pause you there, I think it would be, but we're a few steps before that, because we talked about those variables. It's part of the reason why I walked through that with the VOG. The fifth one is, if we're going to keep a utility in some form, either in whole or in part, then I think there's a perfectly legitimate conversation about adjusting it. I mean, it was put into place when it was put into place based on thinking at the time. We hadn't done one before. Here again, we have years of experience under it, and we could have a conversation about adjusting it. So yes, I think if we end up keeping it in whole and part, that would be a fair conversation. I don't know if that's been decided yet, particularly if we're talking about a potential referendum question, which would provide guidance to be about whether you even have a utility. And we wouldn't want to spend a lot of time talking about tweaking utility if the consensus is don't have one. Then it would just be your property tax, and that would be that. Or, I've heard more than one person talk about the other. Let's not throw out the other. So I'm sorry, please.
Anyhow, back to business. Revising the calculation using the ratio of your impervious property to impervious property, your total property, you only need one category for residential property. You don't need the multiple tiers. It'll be based on the total property. And then you can get into the credits and stuff for rain gardens and et cetera. But on to page 2, I'm just concentrating on the red ink now. I've got plenty of that. How about the administrative costs for the homeowners? You got a 74-page ordinance, 13-page credit report. I mean, it took me about 4 hours to kind of weed through it to get through all of that. And then I got to our stormwater website where they had the sound effects, the storm sound effect. You got to hear that. It's fun.
I've heard it.
Yeah. Anyhow, I was going to have that going tonight here. Anyhow.
Don't set your speakers too loud when you're at work.
So, most of the ordinance and such are based on around new properties and what's required for them. What are new properties? Less than 5% of the total in the community. So the other 95% of people are forced with weeding their way through all of this just to try to find a credit. I've done a lot of research in the other communities, probably 18 to 20 of them now. And one of the things that stood out about most of them is their best practices and outreach to their communities. Requirements that for individual properties is one thing, but you still have the other neighbors. So what most of these outreaches have done is kind of gone neighborhood by neighborhood and put together a plan to address the neighborhood problems and maintain them, whether it be new property or existing. I was watching a house being built up in the north side here, and they're putting in a big underground swimming pool, which was nice, but their property was still higher than the next door neighbors. And the new swimming pool was going to add even more elevation to that. So I'm not sure how that turned out, but that kind of stuff, you really need to do it neighborhood by neighborhood. And that outreach is probably one thing that could make the most difference in getting everybody involved and having more people to work on individual properties as well. And trying to streamline maybe our credit and incentive program a bit to get people involved. I noticed, and was surprised to notice, we're in about 5 communities in this conservation in our community program. And I don't recall hearing anything about it, and was wondering how that ended up. What was the outcome of that? It was sponsored by the Conservation Foundation for sustainability. And I'd like to hear more about what the results of that was and how that impacts what we're doing now. It all ties together. Which leads me to the swamp. One item in our ordinances, et cetera, that isn't really focused on is maintaining the detention ponds and such once they are installed. And that's the biggest difference. And I'm pointing to the village property on this one. It does need to be maintained. We'd love to do something with our properties, but we really can't do much until something's done with the swamp next door to get water moving. So I would like to see at least something be done. Now, through the county, there are some programs to assist. I'm not sure whether they meant paperwork or manpower. And through Conservation Foundation, they do volunteer work, helping to do cleanup in a lot of different areas. It would be a small project for them as it would be for the village to assist in just cleaning it up. Moving out some of the cattails, allowing an area for water to flow, to keep it out of our yards so that we can maintain our yards. I think that's it for now. I got more ready for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and thank you for this, both the hard copy and electronic. Other questions or comments? Please.
Yeah, I have Kurt Wiesner from 4516 Mid-Out. The question as far as what's the percentage represent the 3.9 million of revenue to total revenue in our village annual budget? To get an idea of the perspective here.
Start with the general fund. Our general operating fund budget is about 45 million, 46 million a year. All revenues prior to transfers in and out for all funds, over 100 million.
Say it's about 110.
It's about probably 100. It's 130, 140, 145 all in. Then you strip the transfers out. It's around the number the mayor's put out there, about 110 million, give or take.
Okay, thank you.
This is when we need one of those pie charts. Please.
I just have a question.
Welcome.
I'm Carol Richard, also from Bear Creek. And so, you know, we've got our problem. So it's surprising to me when I drive up Fairview, right behind Deer Creek, or very much close to Deer Creek, and there's these big new houses going up, which of course are going to affect our stormwater, I would think. Is it ever possible through zoning maybe to just not allow houses to be built, or three that are built there to limit it to one?
Demolish them.
I mean, you can impose a fee on the builder, but we still have to live with the condition.
Which side of Fairview? Is it the east side or the west side?
It's the east side.
Am
I
I-
believe it's the ones at 57th and Fairview. I think it's technically Westmont property. It's right there by the
Oh, that's
retention area. Yeah, I think that's part of the issue.
Yeah, right.
We brought that up, but I think it goes to a good point, is where the two villages need to be working together on this, because especially at that
Yes.
point of entry, and we should be working with Lyle as well, because
Yes.
we're all shipping it.
We have had some communications at the mayoral and at the managerial level about that. I will simply say it takes two to tango.
Right. I understand, because I think at the mapping open house, we were talking to some of the county commissioners, and they said there is some funding for villages, especially those that are working together
Right.
to address certain issues.
So it's duly noted, and there have been conversations. It's a process.
What can we do to help?
Bless you. I think you've been doing pretty well. Well, I'll talk to you afterwards.
All right.
Talk to you offline. Other questions or comments? Great. Well, I really appreciate everybody staying around and listening so attentively and providing such good mindful comments and input. This is a continuing conversation. We have some direction tonight, but we're not obviously finalizing anything. Our next step in this process.
I don't know. We'll have to sort of recap with staff members, and then we'll
Fair
provide
enough.
next steps.
But there will be a next step. Any final comments or questions from the council?
This is before or after the new business item?
I was going to turn to that next, but I just want to make sure that there wasn't anything on item 11. It's still item 12. Okay, very well. Then we'll move to item 12. This is the last item before we adjourn. Item 12 is designated for council member new business items. There is a new business item that is under item 12, obviously. Our custom is that the council person who suggested the new business item be raised with the council at this point in the agenda be given the opportunity to introduce it and explain what the impetus was behind it. Commissioner White was the council member who put this forward, so I will give the floor to Commissioner White to explain what this new item is. And then we'll go from there.
We have had some discussion earlier about about the idea of advisory referendums, and this is where I'm coming from on that. That hopefully everybody understands this is a very complex, intricate problem with lots of different pieces that interact with each other. Also, I have some pretty firm on that, may not the right word, some pretty strong or passionate opinions about what I believe the best way forward is. However, I'm only one of 7 on the council and only one of about 50,000 in the village. So I don't believe I have the right to impose my perspective on this without enough input. And as I think I've said several times this evening, getting my way is less important than us ending this process with something that has a chance of being sustainable long-term with support across the community. So with all that in mind, what I suggested, and I proposed three sort of hypothetical referendum questions, is that the November 16 election is expected to have extraordinary numbers of people showing up, especially if certain presidential candidates are on the ballot, that everybody be voting. And that might provide us a unique opportunity to...
Might be a lot of people not voting.
Yeah, but a unique opportunity to gauge public opinion on some of these questions. Because, for example, in the summer of 2012, the village council seemed to think it was pretty well established that a steady stormwater utility fee growing as the exclusive funding source was the right way to go, and there was consensus for that. And yet, subsequent councils have hesitated to fully fund it. We haven't had, if we're doing the 8% every year, and if 4 or 5 of us believed in the 8% every year, we wouldn't be here tonight. We'd just be doing the 8% per year, and we'd be going forward. If a referendum question were addressed to that, and if 55% of the community said, we like option 1, then I think the council members would take that into account, and people would be hesitant to vote to repeal the stormwater utility when 55% said they want it. So that's why I think, but how those questions are phrased is extraordinarily important. So the specific item of new business, for us to try to haggle out the language all at once, I think might be a little cumbersome. So my specific proposal was that you select 2 council members and a member of the Stormwater Review Committee, and we work with as many members of staff as staff believes appropriate to craft various options, various forms of language, and then obviously individual council members can speak with other individuals one by one to bring back certain options at some future point so that we can come up with sample language to put on an advisory referendum ballot in November 2016. I'll add, too, that I spoke yesterday morning with Manager Fieldman. He raised the idea of doing a survey. And I think with the expected number of people that are going to vote, I think we should do the referendum, but I think doing that in subsequent to a survey process, which will allow more nuance in public education, doing both might be a good idea. But that's a little different than the referendum. So basically, what I'm asking is whether there's consensus on council to form a committee to propose sample referendum questions for future discussion by council.
Thank you. Two quick things. One, as mentioned, I think there is probably a place for a referendum question that would, in my mind, it's just my opinion, provide guidance to those charged with, as was mentioned, the duty of making decisions and governing. I don't want a question that is in lieu of governing. I think that is not what we're supposed to do. I think we have been elected to make decisions after listening to input, doing our due diligence, considering the various options, reaching consensus, and making a decision. There's a referendum held in this town every 2 years. It's called the consolidated election. That being said, receiving guidance from the community as to whether they like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream, having now tasted both, I think is a fair point, because that then would allow us to make a decision on some of these other variables. That to me is a little bit more palatable.
I'm okay with that.
So I'm okay with that. Then the mechanics, and I'm intrigued by the suggestion of the committee. My initial reaction is that it sounds a little overly bureaucratic for what we're trying to do and may actually be more cumbersome. And here's what I'm saying. Maybe I have more faith in this group and our village attorney. Well, I do, because I think that between our village attorney, once we have identified what the issue is, and if it is, do you like chocolate or vanilla, then I think that I have confidence that staff can craft something that then we can wordsmith without a whole lot of going through an appointment process and having more meetings, and then that is going to have to come back to us anyway, because the committee won't have the final say on it. And that's where I'm just concerned it would elongate the process rather than simplify it. And frankly, we already have 3 lawyers on this board. I know that's something that already Commissioner Waldak's trying not to throw up in his mouth. So there's already 3 lawyers on this board. I think we can do the wordsmithing. But that's just my...
I tossed out 3 3 examples for us to help decide.
Sure.
And work on that.
And I think we can.
And if we think we can,
I think we
can.
can.
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't
that
think
too.
we need a committee.
Yeah, I would concur.
And the deadline for the referendum is what,
That's my
90? Yeah,
92 days.
92 days, so you
Or
got...
at least, that's.
I think you've got to start it.
Citizenship. We've got some time.
Yep.
I think we need to refine what the question is,
Right, definitely.
and then get the language.
I'm fine with
Yeah.
that. I'm fine with that, yeah.
But then I think this group is perfectly capable of coming up with the language.
Move the ball forward.
Given where we ended, given the discussion tonight, I think we're in a good position.
I do too. I think this was very instructive.
Yeah, I think we're in a good position to avoid this step, this
I
committee
agree.
process.
My thought
and-
that I just
and be
articulated was
directed
formed by the conversation we just had.
here. I agree.
And I'm far less committed to the referendum committee after spending the time this past weekend writing 3 sample questions. I didn't done that a week ago. I didn't do business.
I knew you could do it.
Okay,
All right.
I'm fine.
So then we don't need to proceed with any new business item there, but I thank you for bringing it forward. It was fostered a good
I
discussion.
wouldn't have read the 3 questions if I hadn't done the new business.
Any council members have any other items of new business? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Just so we feel like we're in the other room, may I have a roll call, please?
Commissioner White?
Aye.
Commissioner Olson?
Aye.
Sorry.
Commissioner Mulder?
Aye.
Commissioner Patino?
Aye.
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Mayor Tully?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you and good night. Appreciate everyone coming.